Slate 8, take 1.
I'm Nathan Lawson. I'm a geography student at the University of Oxford, particularly focusing on environmental geography and Indigenous ontologies. I'm the former president of the Oxford Climate Society, and I currently run a podcast called The Climate Breakdown. I think the cause that I'm most passionate about or most invested in is Indigenous knowledges. Understanding how Indigenous knowledge competes with or has historically been erased from scientific knowledge and Western modes of knowledge or Western modes of knowing. And so actually my dissertation currently is focused on Indigenous ontologies in India and basically just incorporating that into the academic space that I'm in Oxford. What do they mean to me? That's a good question. So I'm a mixed race, I'm half Indian, half English, and in a weird way, in a good way, through the academic topic that I focus on, Indigenous knowledge, I've been able to reconnect with my culture. So it's actually interesting. So, well, obviously, I'm from a Hindu family, and I've started through this academic work to realise the privileges, even though I'm a person of colour in the UK, when you go to India, you're at the top of the caste system because it's still very pervasive. And so, particularly when I'm focusing on Indigenous knowledge, or interestingly, they're not actually in the caste system, so they have very little rights. Not that the lowest caste does have many rights either, but they're actually not in the system at all. So when I'm focusing on it, it's a brilliant way to learn more about Indian culture and also the ways that's actually very problematic as well, so to critique it. Also learning more about my positionality as a researcher or an academic in Oxford. I'm not naive to the fact that Oxford and Cambridge, were big colonial administrators back in, and they still have lots of colonial tendencies. So navigating that space actually is interesting, but also very difficult. Where do you stand, especially, for example, doing interviews with Indigenous people. I'm coming here, I'm saying, hi, I'm Nathan Lawson, I don't even speak the language, right? Expecting them to speak English or get a translator. So that's a very broad answer to your question, but navigating that space for me has been a good way to connect and reconnect with my culture and learn more. So specifically relating to climate crisis and the environmental crisis that we're currently in, the people who are most sustainable on the planet are Indigenous people. Obviously I've focused on India, but this is the case throughout Africa, South America. And so there's so much wealth of knowledge to learn from these people. But as I said, historically they've been erased and not counted as knowledge, particularly from a feminist lens. Most of the people that I'm speaking to are farmers, mostly women. They're more clever than most of the people that I meet in Oxford and Cambridge, who've got PhDs. These are also illiterate women, so they can't actually read or write, but their knowledge is through the roof. So yeah, that's why it's so exciting. It's because if you can capitalise, well, not capitalise, but understand and appreciate the knowledge that they have that isn't written, but rather spoken, I think the West has a lot to learn and can be a lot more sustainable if they follow in that trajectory. Okay, so one of the most pressing issues within this niche is validating that knowledge internally within India. So as I said, I'm coming at it from the West, from Oxford. But what about internally within India? There's enough internal issues, domestic issues, for their basic land rights, but also epistemic rights. How can we legislate and make sure that their knowledge, their land, etc., is acknowledged in law, essentially? So quite practical in that sense. I think that's the most pressing issue for Indigenous people, but I don't want to speak for them. But from my interviews, etc., this is what I've sort of gathered. Do you know what? This is the question that I've been thinking about the most, because it's that's like a deep, what do you want to do with your life sort of question. Do you know what I mean? But which I don't know the answer. I'm good friends with Joycelyn, and we talk about that all the time. What's the next? I'm coming up to my final year. What's next? Do you know what? Let me just say a big thing. I'm trying to be next David Attenborough, basically. That's what I'm trying to be. Yeah. So that was a very long-winded answer, but I'm trying to be the brown David Attenborough. That's what I'm trying to do. So my recommendation for people who want to affect positive change is learn, educate yourself. Actually, the biggest learning curves that I've had have been outside of the classroom. You're taught, as we're learning through process like the Black Lives Matter movement, Roads Must Fall. Our education hasn't been taught in a very holistic way, right? There's certain knowledges, right, that have been erased, but also that of women, that of people of colour. So make an effort essentially to go out of your way and read these alternate knowledges that may not also be written actually, right? Go and speak to people, because that's also a really effective way that Indigenous people pass knowledge on, is through spoken word. So find these alternate places of knowledge, locations of knowledge, and educate yourself outside of the traditional box of thinking. That's what I'd sort of recommend. And then critically, don't just sit with it, do something with it actively, and try to, in whatever space you're in, try to do something with it. I would just say, just everyone needs to chill out and just relax, because everyone's just in these pockets of echo chambers, etc. And actually, so I've done a lot of studying about conspiracy theorists, and actually what they want is a lot of commonalities with left-wing groups, which is to an extent anti-establishment, right? They're anti-elitism. Cool, most people would agree with that. Then they just take it too far. So my point is, I think the world would be a much better place if people just chilled out, had a coffee, had a pint, and just chatted. Yeah.
Oh,
That was a lot.
love it. Yeah, great.